Presentation by Dr. Shibani Das. Can you introduce?
Head of the maxillofacial department at Ashwini Trauma Center, Cuttack, and she has a great experience in managing such injuries. And me and sir are also involved with her in managing such cases. So, welcome, Dr. Shibani. Thank you so much for joining us in this AIOC session.
So
Please
we
over
have
to
a
you. You can come. Shibani, you can come.
opportunity to have is doing great work in maxillofacial surgery at Ashwini Trauma Center with us, and she agreed to be part of this IC. Thank you, Shivani. You can start.
Thank you, sir. A very good afternoon to everyone. Before I begin at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Santosh Mahapatra and Shweta ma'am for giving me this opportunity. I've been working with Santosh sir in the past 7 years, and we have had the opportunity to operate very good cases. And I'm here to share basically what I know about the orbit, how I do it, and what is my approach in managing these injuries, and when do we give a call to our ophthalmic surgeons, and how do they help us out. So to begin with, you guys know it better how the globe is positioned within the orbit. It's not one bone, but it's 7 bones that form the orbit, and it has extraocular muscles, infraorbital nerve, orbital fat, optic nerve. So we need to take into consideration all these. So there is a rule of 7 which says that there are 7 bones, there are 7 intraorbital muscles, there are 7 nerves. So it's a complex structure that we are dealing with, and that is why we stand at the crossroads of multi-specialty care while addressing the eye. So there are also ligaments, the medial canthal ligament, lateral, and the lacrimal drainage apparatus, which makes it a complex system. And the incidence is fairly common. Isolated fractures are less common, whereas orbital fractures with the zygomatic complex and nasoorbital ethmoid fractures compose of about 30 to 55%, and it involves commonly the orbital floor, which is the most weakest structure in the orbital anatomy. So to classify broadly, we have this blowout, blow-in, orbital rim fractures, and more commonly that we see in our practice are the ZMC fractures, Lefort fractures, and naso-orbitoethmoid or the NOE fractures. So these are the scans that we typically see. So we ask for a coronal scans, and they can present in variety of presentations. The first one showing that the complete disruption of the floor of the orbit, and you can appreciate the teardrop sign, that is the herniation of the inferior rectus muscle or the orbital fat. And also in cases where there is fracture of the ethmoidal sinus, you also can have air entrapment. So these are the things you need to appreciate in the coronal sections. And based on the theories that we know today, we know that the floor of the orbit is one of the most common structures to get affected, and that is why it's important to see whether there are any muscle entrapment or not. So based on the velocity of injuries, you can have a trapdoor fractures, medial blowout fractures, or a lateral blowout in case of high velocity injuries, where you can have concomitant fractures of other structures surrounding the eye. So these are the clinical features that we see commonly the patients present to us. So what we see is, first thing very glaring is the periorbital edema and the subconjunctival ecchymosis. Typically what I know is they call it as like a raccoon eyes. And we try to appreciate the orbital dystopia, that the globe orbits are not positioned in the same alignment. You can have traumatic telecanthus. There can be exophthalmos or enophthalmos, ptosis if you have a oculomotor injury. There can be diplopia. We are looking at mechanical entrapment leading to diplopia, not the neural involvement over here, and hypoglobus, mostly at a later stage when the swelling and things subsides. So this is how we take pictures and try and appreciate orbital dystopia and the enophthalmos hypoglobus. Something very important that we have also tried learning to do at the emergency department is the ophthalmic examination that has been very broadly described by the American Association of Ophthalmology. Before we give a call to the ophthalmologist, we make small notes for ourselves. So this is how we do it, and first you do the pupillary examination and try and see whether the pupils are reacting to light or not. And something very important is to note if there is a Marcuscan pupil where it is not constricting. We check basically for the mechanical entrapment. So you do the eye gaze movement in all the gazes. Yes, all the 9 gazes, the movement, and this is how you move your finger and ask the patient to keep the head still, and you check whether there is a restriction of gaze in any of the directions. So this is what we know and how we do it. So basically what I am looking at is whether there is any mechanical entrapment of the inferior rectus muscle, and you can very well appreciate that in a coronal or the sagittal scans. And our colleagues help us with tonometry, where they can tell us about the ocular pressure, and these are things which need a optal setting. So I've just added it that these are important things. To check for the globe examination and the position, you need the exophthalmometer. Fundoscopic examination, again, very important. Sometimes our neuro colleagues help with us to see if there is any kind of retrobulbar hemorrhage, which needs immediate lateral canthotomy, so that we can at least not have the compartment syndrome. And sometimes if we take the patient immediately, we do a force duction test, so wherein you grasp the conjunctiva close to the limbus with a non-tooth forceps, and you do exactly the same movements which you were trying to do earlier, but here you're holding with an instrument and try and see whether there is any mechanical tethering. So this is one of our cases where before surgery of the orbital floor repair, we try and do that movement. And after repair, we try and see that again, whether that mechanical tethering is gone or not. So it is imperative that you do it pre and post your surgery to know that the muscle entrapment that you have tried to release, and once you have done the floor repair, is complete. So diagnostic imaging, I think we all agree that computed tomography today is the gold standard, and it is important that you ask for scans in all the sections, that is coronal, sagittal, and the axial sections, because there are things that you see in each of these sections. Very important, when to intervene. Now, if there is an ophthalmos which is 2 mm, the patient is going to complain because it looks unaesthetic. There is persistent diplopia. Positive force duction test, when you see there is mechanical tethering, that is an indication that this needs to be released. There are signs of comminution and displacement, obvious fractures around the eye, and displacement of orbital rib with unstable bone fragments. Lateral injuries, for minimal displace, you wait and watch. Visible contour deformity, definitely go reduce and fix it. Diplopia, we have to correct it. Traumatic optic nerve, just make a phone call to your colleagues and they can help us out with a decompression. So this is on paper which says that most of the cases, 94 out of 94 cases, 80 cases required exploration of the orbital floor, and it is imperative that we do it, even if sometimes there are no physically you cannot see the muscle being entrapped like in a trap door into the maxillary sinus, but when you examine the patient, you have a diplopia. So that is also an indication to explore the orbit and see if there are physical listing. So this is the armamentarium which we have, and we use it routinely during orbital surgery. And these are the approaches. I prefer the subciliary approach, and for the medial wall of the orbit, I go with the modified Lynch incision and lateral brow approach. I do not use upper lid blepharoplasty, but I have mentioned it for the sake of completion. So subciliary, I go 2 millimeters below the gray line of the lower eyelid, and you have subtarsal incision which is 5 to 7. Infraorbital today is very least practiced according to my knowledge, and if there is a pre-existing laceration, of course you can go through that. So various way to reach to the infraorbital rim. You can have the skid flap alone technique. You can take along with the muscle, and you can step it, the skin, separate the muscle, and then you reach out to the infraorbital rim. And once you go the transconjunctival way, you can have the retroseptal or the preseptal technique. What we commonly use is the preseptal technique, where you do not encroach the orbital septum at all and try and reach to the infraorbital rim, sparing the orbital septum completely. So this is the Lynch incision which I was talking about, which gives us good access to the medial wall of the orbit. And sometimes if there are extensive NOE fractures, we go for the extended globular approach, though appears unaesthetic, but still gives a good access to treat the fractures. I haven't used this approach, but there is something called a transcaruncular approach which can also be used, which is lateral to the caruncle. This is something we use along with the neurosurgery when there are extensive injuries and when we also need to address the orbit, the coronal approach. These are few of our cases that we have operated, the fixing the rim. The goals of reconstruction is to repair obviously the traumatic defect, to correct the eye position anatomically, avoid enophthalmos, and to restore ocular function. And you try and see that you maintain the sanctity of the area, not distort any vital structures. And important notes is to deherniate the orbital contents to restore the internal orbital volume. And while doing the orbital floor repair, we try and see that the posterior ledge is where you have the posterior extent of the of your implant. So these are the materials that are available today. We mostly use titanium mesh. Sometimes we have used Prolene also, but not autologous materials. But these are where you can harvest your autologous materials from. And this is commonly what we use in our practice: titanium meshes and Prolene mesh. And this is one of the cases where we had done through a subciliary approach to repair the floor of the orbit. And these are the complications. So what not to neglect is enophthalmos, ectropion, entropion, which is seen mostly in retrobulbar hemorrhage, orbital apex syndrome, oculocardiac reflex mostly in pediatric patients, traumatic optic neuropathy, lacrimal injuries. And these are recent advances where we are currently trying patient-specific implants for correcting post-traumatic deformity. And we have not tried computer-assisted surgery, but we have tried transantral, not endoscopic, but transantral approach to lift the floor of the orbit through the maxillary antrum. So these are recent advances. I've seen Santosh sir use Orbital for globe implants that he has used. So to conclude that successful reconstruction depends on precise diagnosis, meticulous surgical technique, appropriate choice of biomaterials, and also calling for help to your colleagues when in need. And these are my references, and this is where I practice, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Shibani. Very well demonstrated the approaches and the methods. This is beyond our scope, but at least we are. Thank you. That's what I told, sir, from the beginning. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you, sir.
See, how do you use 3D constructions? Because that is the latest, right?
Yes, sir.
So how do you use that to approach the cosmetically acceptable outcomes?
So basically, sir, correcting secondary traumatic deformities, we ask the patient to get a CT scan. Minimum thickness of the CT scan should be what the company asks is 0.625 millimeters. So we take the scan and we upload the DICOM files into the software. So what they do is, you have the normal eye, you have the, when I say normal eye, it's the surrounding structure. So you have the affected part. So they mirror image the normal onto the affected part and see how much is the deficiency. So we know the orbital volume, let's say, should be around 30 cc. Now you see that there is a defect which we have now, let's say about 38 cc. The volume is 38 cc. So you have a difference of 8 cc. So when they fabricate the implant, they try and make that a little thicker around that area. So all you need to do is just go through your approach nicely and place your implant, so it becomes more accurate that way. So that is how, I mean, I've just done 2 cases, but this is the engineering behind how we do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and lid injuries, how do you ensure that the lacrimal canal is intact or injury is not there?
So we do dye tests actually to see whether there is a lid injury or not. And if not, after that it is Santosh sir actually.
That is a good answer, yeah.
But if we do the dye test to see that there is a blockage or not. That is just to know that there is a blockage.
That is one thing we need to rule out actually while
Yes,
repairing.
definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you for nice questions, sir, and good interaction.